And I would never state that with 100% certainty, but I would say in some cases, I've never given this testimony. I've never been asked to give this testimony, but I'm just saying that where I ask, doctor, with reasonable medical certainty, based upon your experience in having smelled 20,000 dead bodies in your career, and so on, when you walked into that room and you smelled before it had been ventilated or anything else had been introduced, that you have an opinion as to whether or not the odor that you detected was consistent with or suggestive of a dead body. You see what I mean there?
Right.
So I would say yes or I would say no. I wouldn't state that with absolute certainty. No way. But should my opinion not? Would you? You have a butcher. I don't mean to be crude. A butcher who has slaughtered animals, cut up pigs and cows and sheep and what have you, and you want to test your testimony as to whether or not the odor was consistent with a slaughtered animal or so on. Would you say, well, what the hell does he know? I mean, think about it.
It's a great point. I want to ask you one last thing about Colonel Philip Michael Shue.
Yes.
In reading it, and again, I don't want to give it away because I want people to pick up the book From Crime Scene to Courtroom, but it really felt as if there was interference from the military in the entire investigation into his passing.
Yes, I agree with you completely. You're very perceptive. Absolutely. There's no question that the military, in my opinion, behind the scenes, indirectly exerted influence and so on. There's another case of rush to judgment in which we can tell your listeners this case in which they signed this bizarre death out as a suicide, and I think we pretty much proved, and subsequent court action litigation went along with it, that this was a homicide. So this gets back to what I was talking about before. People rushing to judgment, number one, and sometimes people being influenced, either knowingly or unwittingly manipulated, controlled, influenced by third parties.
Or given an order and threatened. That exists too.
Yes.
It exists.
And there are different kinds of threats. It's not always a threat of life. There are other kinds of threats, right?
Sure. Absolutely. And lastly, I'd like to know at what time in your life you decided that this calling was yours.
Well, very quickly, it's like this. I was an only child. My parents were immigrants from Europe, and from the time before I could remember, and from the time that I can remember, my father simply told me I was going to be a doctor. So I never questioned that. I was an obedient son, and I was going to be a doctor. And so I was pre-med, and I became very active on campus, and I was a big man on campus, a president of student body, and president of my fraternity, and a bunch of other things. Even as a Jew, I was elected as president of the YMCA, and so on. So when you were a big man on campus, it was assumed that you were pre-law, right? I mean, pre-med students didn't have time to screw around with that sort of stuff. So maybe that was the first time I began to think about law school. In the meantime, I applied and was accepted to med school, and continued to think about law, and got in touch with some prominent people in the field early on in my junior year, and at that point I made up my mind that I was going to go to law school, and that I wanted to do and be involved with legal medicine. And then I decided I did not want to be a general practitioner or both. I wanted to be a specialist. And at that point I thought, what is the specialty that is most frequently and extensively and meaningfully involved with medical legal matters? And that obviously, unquestionably, is forensic pathology. And that's when I decided then, after my internship, to undertake a residency in pathology, which I did for 5 years, including that fifth-year fellowship in forensic pathology. So that's how it all came about.
I really want to invite you back, and I want to.
My pleasure.
And I want to thank you so much for joining us, Cyril Wecht.
I thank you for your courtesy and thoughtfulness and hospitality and having me. It would be my pleasure to be with you again. Let me know, okay?
I would love it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.